Welcome to another museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator at POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, here on Long Island. Although my Zoom background is actually from the maker space at the Montreal Science Center. And I'm delighted this afternoon to welcome David Wells. Welcome, David Wells. That sounds very mellifluous, very alliterative.
Yes.
Usually, David, I like to ask people to tell us a little bit about their background before we get started with the main part of the conversation. So why don't you take it away? Give us your nickel tour of David Wells, how you got to where you are now.
All right. I'll try to keep the price at a nickel, so that's no problem. Yeah, it's interesting. Becoming an educator, I think, was part of somewhere in my trajectory for a long time, but really kind of how I approached it was not very straight. So I just kind of meandered a lot. When I was much younger, I started doing like music and art, and that was something that I was really into, and kind of creating things. That was like really at the crux of it. Even when I was a kid, like I was always my dad's helper, and we were always making things and building things. But as I got older, I didn't feel like I really fit anywhere as I was doing things, and that's why I chose the music and the art world, because it seemed like that's where all the outliers went. And in some ways I didn't really fit there either. So it was a bit of a challenge for me. So I kind of rode that wave for a while and kind of explored different ways to make a living out of music and art. And that was very challenging. So then I decided to go to art school, which that's of course the logical next step. But that was actually really beneficial just to give this idea of like how important education is. Because growing up, I didn't have the best experience. And going back to college as an older student was great, because I was like, wow, this is like an oasis. This is everything at your fingertips. College is awesome. And so I really thrived, and I started growing a lot in that way. And then as things went down the line, I wanted to get back into education. I skipped a point. I was a preschool teacher for a long time, for about 6 years in my early 20s. And I wanted to get back in education, back into working with kids. So I decided to go to graduate school, as you know, at Bank Street. Which was a phenomenal experience for me as a learner, but also having a job at the New York Hall of Science. I actually got into graduate school and got a job at the New York Hall of Science basically within a month of each other. And so then I had to figure out how to balance that, which was a whole nother process. But it was a great experience because Bank Street's real spinal cord is theory and practice. And I was able to be a practitioner while I was learning theory. And I usually describe it when I'm talking to people about it. I say, like, I grew 5 years in that 2-year time frame, because I was able to just hear things that are theoretical and see them in practice, which was hugely beneficial for me in my growth as a practitioner, as a designer of curriculum, designer of programs, and things like that. And then, for me, it's kind of, as we were talking earlier, jack of all trades, master of none. Except my master's degree, I guess, qualifies me as a master. But
I would say master, certainly master of some.
Yeah, okay, master of some. I'll take it. But kind of building that into it, the maker ethos started kind of bubbling up, maker movements and things like that. And so I started working more on programs around that. And then, at the New York Hall of Science, we started really getting into that and opened a makerspace. And that's kind of all of the different branches that kind of led me to build this. Now, even since I started to now, it's been a total whirlwind of growth and experience and meeting people and, being out in the world, but I can save that for another time.
Well, or later in this conversation. So that's great. So that's an interesting trajectory. This video should, I'm sure, resonate with many people in the museum business whose trajectory doesn't follow a clear straight line. And this is maybe the subtitle of this video is "Making for Misfits," but rather than go down that particular road, maybe we can start the conversation more broadly and talk about sort of how to develop a maker mindset at your organization, your institution, which could be a museum, but it could be an after-school program. Obviously, successful maker spaces and design labs and libraries, places for adults, and workshops open to the public. Lots of different ways this plays out, but since we play mostly towards the museum end of the spectrum, I'd be interested, since you've sort of ridden the wave of the real height, maybe, of the height of maker hype. What you think about now as you're doing your own professional work related to making and designing and education of people, but also maybe sort of a dual mindset, things that you might share, tips for people who are thinking about a maker space, a creative art space, a design lab, or thinking about reinvigorating their existing spaces. Like, they started out with a big burst of funding and enthusiasm. They bought 10 3D printers, and then they realized, oh, maybe that wasn't the best way to spend our resources. So let's talk. Let's start after that perambulating preamble. I'd just be interested if you would talk a little bit about maker mindsets for organizations.
Well, it's interesting, like, to consider the maker mindset, as a as a movement, or as part of the movement. It existed in concept as long as we've existed. I think one of the benefits of having some sort of focused point is that people like focused points, and people like to be able to hold on to something rather than an ambiguous, like, oh, I can do a lot of different things, or whatever it is. So in that way, I think it was very beneficial to give people this identifying title of being a maker. And obviously, I mean, everybody makes things, and that's something that just, like, happens. It's funny when I do professional developments with teachers and stuff, I start out by, asking, like, who here is a maker, who makes things? And of course, generally nobody raises their hand. And then I say, has anyone made a sandwich? And then they say, like, oh, I made a sandwich. I'm like, okay, well, you've made a sandwich. So let's think about this process now. So you had a challenge, a problem, a desire. You were hungry. What did you do? You collected your materials, whatever your bread, anything you put in your bread, your tools, your knife, your this, your plate, whatever it might be. You put it together, and then you ate the sandwich. So now you've gone through the whole process of what the maker mindset's all about. It's about utilizing your resources to explore opportunities for challenging situations, problem solving, for fun, for jokes, for anything you want it to be, and it's taken on such an interesting dynamic, because I feel since the maker movement has come about, the maker mindset has become something of a license to just explore anything you want. And when you give yourself that sort of permission to explore anything you want, you start discovering so many different aspects. And I think that really builds into, what the core of the maker mindset is, or thinking about design thinking, or how you process thinking. It's all under the same umbrella. And one of the things that I would really emphasize in the earlier days, when I would, give a presentation, or I would talk to a group of people about aspects of what I do, and I would, have a bunch of different processes up there, such as the scientific process, the design process, the creative process, the maker process, whatever you want to say it is. And I would have diagrams of all of them up that are, I found on the internet. And I said, these are really all the same processes. We're just using different tools, and we're using different materials, and maybe different outcomes, depending on, the industry. But to give the opportunity to explore those different design processes, whether it be a scientific process or any other, gives you that freedom to utilize it and use it in other areas. And I think that's really that crossover, that the time frame that the maker movement started erupting with the access to the internet, i.e. the world at all times of the day and night, democratizing people's thoughts and ideas, and everyone becoming the teacher and the learner at the same time, I think is a very strong distinction, because you didn't have to be a certified person to go in and teach someone something on YouTube. You just said, hey, I did this cool thing, let me share it with you, and this is how I did it. And then all of a sudden you have Khan Academy, and you have all these different places, you know, there's a million of them obviously, but just ways that you could learn on your own. And that's another incredibly strong point about the maker mindset, is like, you pursue or you seek out learning experiences because it's a motivation from you intrinsically, or project based, or whatever it might be. It's a matter of you actually having to go above and beyond receiving something to actually acquire it.
So I like that you use that example of making a sandwich, because I think sometimes if people hear about makers or making, you know, they think about this whiz kid who developed a Rubik's Cube solving robot out of Legos, and, you know, it's something that's amazing, but a little bit more complicated, obviously, than making a sandwich. But I mean, it's that double-edged sword. I'd be interested, since I know you work with teachers and museum professionals, how you get people over that hump to think about themselves as makers, or to think, or to get them into a maker mindset, you know, to not start and say, oh, well, I'm not like those guys. I'm not like those guys on Mythbusters, or I'm not like this guy who made this gigantic, singing Tesla coil, or that. You know, I think a lot of times you have these super special projects that get highlighted for good reason, and people think that's the only way to be a maker. But if somebody knits or cooks or does woodworking projects or home repairs, they still are learning things and developing a maker mindset. So I'm wondering, based on the workshops and the talks that you give with teachers and museum educators and kids too, how you get people over that sort of perceptual hump, that conceptual hump. I mean, it seems sort of analogous to getting people to feel more comfortable about science and science education in a broad way. They're like, oh, I'm not a scientist. I didn't study science. You know, I'm sure you have a lot of people, like you said, who raise your hand, who's a maker. Nobody raises their hand. But then if you tease out and find out who the sewers or cooks or woodworkers or metalworkers or artists or painters, you know, those are all makers. So how do you get people over that? How do you get people over that hump? Because you got to build that enthusiasm to really keep it going.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think first and foremost, I benefited from the fact that I'm not like one of those people from Mythbusters, and I'm not this person from here. So like, I have a personal connection to that exploration, and like, how do I discover, you know, making for myself? And, you know, when I was a kid, I would, you know, be alongside my dad, and he's an engineer, and we would build stuff, and we would make stuff, and we would take stuff apart, and we would learn how to use really, you know, what most people would consider dangerous tools. And I would be very young. And so coming at it from that angle, I got to explore ways to express it to people. And really what's so important when anyone's learning anything, and if you put yourself in the learner's shoes, you know, you need to feel a comfortable entry point. You need to feel like you belong somewhere in order to learn. And so the first thing that I do to set the stage when I'm working with educators, when I'm working with educators of any capacity, is I try to think about where they're coming from. I ask questions about what their experiences are, and then I pitch those sort of things like, who's a maker? So I go to the kind of more the extreme, like this is a real definitive point in your life to be, consider yourself a maker. But then I say, well, have you made a sandwich? So like, then I dissect the process to say, the process that you go through to make a sandwich is the same process that the person goes through to design a 3D printer. It's the same process. Now, it might take longer, but imagine the first time you made a sandwich, maybe you didn't make it perfectly. You had to do it again, or you had to do it next time, or you were too young to use the utensils or whatever it was, putting that sort of frame on it. And so if you're utilizing any sort of tool, any sort of material to accomplish something that either again, what I was saying, like solving a problem, it's created a challenge, or it's just like a fun, interesting, engaging thing for you, then you are making, therefore you are a maker. And by giving that platform and understanding, and then utilize those examples, like there's, a big, discussion back and forth in a lot of circles about making versus crafting versus, a lot of different things. And to be honest, in my mind, if you're using a tool, you're using materials to have fun, solve a challenge, or, you're making, because then you can bring in chefs. I mean, chefs are clearly makers. They're problem solving every minute of the day. Nurses, they're problem solving every second of the day. They are, utilizing their resources to, leverage the opportunity. And in that case, for nurses, and it's like for people's lives, this isn't just for a fun project. So like, really seeing it that way. And then I find that giving people a platform to understand that and that entry point, it empowers them to realize like, oh, I do have control over certain things. I don't just have to accept what's either handed to me or the stuff, so I can actually speak up for myself. And I think that's the truest sense of, when you are making things or you are contributing to your culture, society, family, friends, whatever it may be, that sort of agency of, what I call in our space is the I can mentality. It really builds that like, I can do this. And it goes back to not just my physical and mental capabilities. It also goes into the permission I'm giving myself. And by giving myself the permission, I'm allowing myself to do this. And when I'm working with educators, once I start going into that idea of giving yourself the permission, and the reason you don't do 90% of the things you want to do is because you're not giving yourself permission.
Yeah, you're already censoring before you've begun.
Yes, like I'm not a maker. Oh, but I make sandwiches. Okay, so wait a second. What are we doing here? It's like, and I know in one sense it's a moniker, in the other sense it's a verb. But like, I don't know. I don't think.
No, but I think that, like you say, developing that maker mindset, the idea that I can do this, the idea that I can figure things out with the resources that I have available. Like, this didn't work exactly how I thought it was going to do. So what can I do now, instead of just giving up? Oh, well, I have to follow these 3 directions, but something didn't work, so I'm just going to stop. Or, well, why didn't it work? Or what can I, how can I hack this? How can I tweak this? So I think it's interesting that mindset comes back to the conversation. But you mentioned on a more deliberate nuts and bolts level, you mentioned tools and materials. And so I'm wondering, since I just threw some shade at 3D printers, I think 3D printers are cool, by the way, but I don't think that they're the be all and end all for everyone who's just starting a makerspace. And I don't think the time frames make a lot of sense, especially in a museum makerspace. So I don't get any hate mail about 3D printers. But David, I'm wondering, if you were starting from scratch, if you had somebody who had developed a maker mindset, or several somebodies at their organization, and they had a space, what would you advise them in terms of initial tools and materials? Like how could you give them some base level advice about the real nuts and bolts stuff to get them started?
Yeah, and so like there's a lot of different approaches to this, and I think at its core, this is a much longer process than, hey, do this. But I'll tell you some of the things that I actually say, do this. Sometimes jokingly, but not so much. I say, okay, you want to start a makerspace, start it tomorrow, and don't buy anything. And then I just kind of walk out of the room for dramatic effect. And they're like, wait, what are you talking about? What do you have already? What do you have that you don't have to buy? Do you have nuts and bolts, literally? Do you have paper clips and wrenches? Do you have these things already? So if you can start things, because once you start, you're not going to stop. It's a matter of really getting it going, instead of saying like, oh, we need to buy this, we need to raise funds for that, and we got to get this space. Now, all of those things are incredibly important. I'm not downplaying those things, but until you do it, you're not going to do it, in a nutshell. So like, there's also something very important, I think, especially from an organizational perspective, for starting these things, is you need someone, and I'm going to borrow this from Jeff Sturgis, which runs, actually, I don't know if he still does, but the Mount Elliott Makerspace in Detroit. But he, at one point, saw him say it, and he borrowed it from somebody else, so it's probably many layers done. But like, you need a burning soul. You need like somebody that really cares and is willing to go above and beyond something to help, not just inspire other people or hopefully inspire other people, but the one that's going to make the run to the hardware store at 11 o'clock at night because their kids need this material at 9 tomorrow morning. The ones that are going to do, like, that's
gonna
really
keep it running no matter what it takes.
Exactly. And like, that is at the core of it. And then I would say the next step to that is, what do you care about, and what do the people you're going to be working with care about? Because if somebody doesn't care about 3D printers, I'm an advocate for 3D printing. What I will say about 3D printers, and I've said it a million times to every educator that I've ever worked with, I said, if you decide to go with 3D printer, understand that it is not an enthusiast tool, it is an enthusiast tool, period, at this point. The technology is phenomenal. It is like mind-boggling what it does. But unless you're willing to change its diaper in the middle of the night, feed it, put it back to bed, and spend a good portion of your life and time taking care of it, fixing it, changing the belts, doing things like that, all it's going to be is very frustrating and a very expensive paperweight, and it doesn't even hold paper very well. It crinkles it up, and I try to, no, but that kind of idea. So like, make sure that no matter what tool you have the time and the staff to care for the tool, clean the tool, put the tool away, things like that. And something like a saw or a clamp takes a lot less care than a 3D printer does. So utilizing what tools you want in your space, best for your community, best for your staff.
Yeah, what your visitors in your community wants to use too. If they are interested in sewing, 3D printer or welding equipment may not be tremendously helpful to them. Those are useful tools, but if everybody in your community wants something else.
Yeah. But one thing that could be great, if it's something you really wanted a welder, then you could make the connections between sewing and welding. So now we've done sewing. Hey, look at this tool over here. Because one of the real essences of makerspaces is it needs to allow the accessibility to things that people want and need, but it also kind of should push you a little bit to things that maybe you can't access outside of the makerspace, because then it's a beneficial space for you to be in. So for instance, when we're running programs, like, we typically try to go as much of as accessible, low cost stuff as possible. But in the reality of it, and we're in a position a lot of times because of grant funding and things like that, that we're able to buy cool tools and cool materials that maybe you wouldn't be able to have at home. And then that's kind of why you come into the space, because we give the entry point of, here's familiar, here's something build the confidence. Now, look at the possibility of this right here. Oh my God, wow. And then you can explore that. And so by kind of ramping up what possibilities tools can provide for you, I always call our makerspace an equal opportunity tool space. Like, every tool has a place, every tool has its role and importance. And so no one tool is going to be the thing that keeps the space running. It's going to be the amalgam of all of those tools.
So that's great. I like the idea of, I think that's sound educational theory that Bank Street instilled in you, that to start with familiar and simple frameworks and to build from there, to push people a little bit farther. So that's a little bit about tools and materials, and I like what you said, for dramatic effect or not. You look around, you already have things that you can use to make interesting things with, if you look at it with that mindset. I'm wondering if you could talk about the space itself. And the reason I ask that is, I think there was, and maybe there still is, a little bit of maker spaces that feels like toys for boys. and very sort of industrial, workshop-y, for lack of a better term, which I don't know if that is as broadly accessible a sort of vision about making as possible. So I'm, of course, I say that in front of my background that looks very workshop-y, but nevertheless, you know, that sort of workshop-y or techy or industrial background appeals to some people, but maybe not to others. So I'm wondering how you navigate that, the physical space.
We try to make it as much of a mess all the time as possible, just so people aren't too, they don't, can I touch this stuff? That's, of course it's intentional. It's not because I can't keep the place clean. It's because I want people to feel comfortable coming into the space.
Okay.
But I think in general, especially when you're talking about accessibility to tools, and what it really comes down to is, I think, two things. One is how you introduce the tools, and really keeping in mind that when you're introducing a tool to someone, it shouldn't be about the, I guess, for lack of a better way to present it, I'll start with the idea of the tool safety. Okay, so when you talk about tool safety, we don't really go over this concept of tool safety, or at least in the traditional sense. I generally liken it to the fact, like if you start driver's ed and they show you a bunch of mangled cars with car wrecks, would you be super excited to go out and drive a car? Probably not. Okay, so like these tools aren't here to hurt you. Where I think a lot of people approach the tools in a way like, oh no, I'm going to get hurt, and I don't want to get hurt. But what we do is we demystify the tool right off the bat. We do a kind of a deconstruction visually. We think about all the pieces in there and say, what is this made of? How does it work together? Like the first one I ever did was for a saw, and I held this up and I said, what is this? How does it work? And so we asked those two questions right off the bat. What is this tool and how does it work? So right off the bat, they're not necessarily thinking of there's a piece of sharpness on here, or I could get hurt, or my finger's going to end up on the ground, or something like that. They think about, what is this? How does it work? So by asking those questions, you're starting that process. And so then it's not about boy, girl, anything that, I'm capable of, not capable of, it's more about what is this and how does it work? And once you solve that, again, you're starting. And once you start, you're most likely not going to stop. So getting that idea of the fact that the tools aren't there to hurt you, they're there to help you. And we could think about why things are created in certain ways. And then that helps kind of reboot back when you're trying to have you're trying to create a project, what do I want to make and how is it going to work? And so I need to think about these aspects. And so approaching the tool then and using it. There's a lot of things, this is kind of the second part to that. There's a lot of things that go through your mind when you're doing something. And my objective when we're introducing any tool, from no matter how dangerous it's considered or not dangerous it's considered, is to really take as many of those other things out of the equation and simplify it. So for instance, when we're using a saw, a hand saw, it's this simple hand saw, we talk about how it works. And of course, 100 out of 100 people, when asked how a saw works, go like this. And so then it gives me the opportunity to show the distinction between how something works and how we use it, because those are two different things. Because it doesn't work like this. So one of my proving points is I'll pick up anything around me. This is a pen. Okay, there. And I start going like this on a piece of wood, and I'm like, why isn't this cutting it? This is how it works. Then we get into the teeth and okay. But when you're starting to use a saw, instead of using wood, because wood is a dense material, we use a foam. So when you're learning how to use the saw, and this could really go for any age, but it's usually obviously a bit younger ages, but in general, if you've never used a saw, you've never used a saw. And so you're focusing on how you're holding the saw, you're focusing on center of gravity, you're focusing on this, and you're not focusing on a straight line, you're not focusing on the pressure of the wood, you're just focusing on the kind of technique of it. Then once you get comfortable with that, then you ramp up to wood. Then you ramp up to just cutting pieces of wood. Then you ramp up to a project you want to make. So the entry point is simple, it's easy, it's not scary. And then you kind of build from there. So once you get to this point, you don't even necessarily realize it, but you have this confidence already with the tool that you're using. And what helps with that confidence is that if you have confidence with a saw, more often than not, the next tool you get introduced to, you're going to have some confidence with from the start. So then you could start at, whatever sort of ramp up aspect of that. But then once you start getting interested in more in different types of tools, you really just start exploring and finding these tools and figuring out the possibilities. So that's a way to kind of just take any sort of spotlight on anyone or anything and just say, hey, what is this thing?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and maybe saws in terms of woodworking tools or hand tools, they or even power tools. Those might be amongst the scariest tools. So yeah, if you figure out how to use a saw or gain that confidence, then probably most other tools you'll have that confidence to carry you forward. Well, David, I since I noticed, and we talked before we started recording, that your background is in Belgium there, and I know you have been lucky to literally travel around the world, seeing maker spaces and working and talking with people. Maybe we could end up by taking advantage of your worldwide expertise here to, if you had to pick out, sometimes we visit museums or you visit places and you're like, wow, is that like such a cool idea? Like every maker space in the world should be doing something like this, or sometimes you just see something that is just, in retrospect, so clever, yet in some ways so obvious. You're like, wow, why didn't I think of that? Wow, why like everybody should be doing that. So not to put you on the spot, but as you spin through your mental travels in maker spaces around the world, I'm wondering if there's one little thing of that sort that stands out. And since we didn't prep this ahead of time, your short answer might be no. And then this video will end with sort of a whimper instead of a bang. But no pressure. No pressure.
Well, I mean, like to get some clarification exactly on the question, because I feel like it's like, how do I narrow it down to one?
Okay. Well, share a couple of examples that really struck you from having had the advantage of seeing and working with makers and maker spaces and the maker mindset around the world, literally.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first ones, museums that came to mind is in Portugal, and it's called Fabrica. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that 100% correctly. It is in Portuguese, but it's in Aveiro, which is maybe middle northern part of the country. They do some really, cool, I'm trying to think how I can describe it. It's like just really cool kind of dissection of stuff, kind of similar to what I was just talking about, this idea of like, how do you deconstruct things and make it accessible or easier to understand? And they do a lot of really cool things in their space. But what really stands out about their spaces, and I can't remember what the factory used to be, but it's in an old factory of some sort. And they have little slides and stuff coming out of the ceilings and things like this, where they would like transport stuff, and everything was, preserved very well, but not like redone. So it still looks cool, but it's done in a very kind of industrial way. And it's just such a, I found it to be such a pleasant space to be in. It was really, just strong to see that.
All right. Well, as they say in YouTube land, we will put links in the description below so that people can follow up about Fabrica in Portugal.
Yeah.
And anything else that strikes you as we close out here, or?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a, I guess plug for some of the work that I've done, but more so about the people that I was working with. I worked with the National Science Museum in Bangkok for about 3 years on a very large scale project. And the work that they are doing around us is just so enthusiastic and energetic and iterative. It's amazing to work with them and see how quickly they do something and change it and move into it and kind of go into this idea and expand on it. And then through discussion and feedback, and they really are just, they accomplish things that I'm like, in my head, I'm like, there's no way this is going to work. And then somehow they make it work, you know. One example of that is they did a pop-up makerspace at their science festival, which sees about 50,000 people a day, and it's a 12-day event, and the museum is there all 12 days. Okay, so Maker Faire New York, 2 days, you know, 100,000 people max. You know, think about this. I mean, it's insane. So we did a pop-up makerspace, and you know, they're like, oh, we're going to do 4 activities throughout the day, and we're going to switch them out. And I'm kind of like, just stick to 1 or 2 maybe. You know, this is too much transition stuff. They stuck to their guns. They did it seamlessly, beautifully, and then we get to the last activity of the day, and there's a line of about 60 kids waiting to get in with their parents. And there are box cutters all over the tables. And me just talking about, oh, you know, let kids use tools. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like even it's hard for me to even see that because I just know how quickly and severely a box cutter can change your day. And it was amazing. The kids were flawless with not one cut. We probably had 600 to 800 kids throughout the next 4 hours, not one single cut. What does that say? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with the saw. Yes. and teaching people. I mean, obviously you need to have an inherent respect for tools, but that's different than having a fear of a tool. Yeah. Or to have the use of a tool exceed your development grasp. So obviously, they felt strongly about that. Well, maybe that's unless you got one more, that might be a perfect place to end. But
no, I think we could end it there. But just about that idea is like when you start using a tool with fear, it's not going to be and that taught me a lot because I'm the one who's saying, don't start using tools with fear. And I was afraid of the box cutter for these kids. And like, I was taught that that's not something I needed to worry about.
But it worked out. It worked out.
Yeah, like it was great. And I'm like, gosh, I wish maybe in this country, because even people that are, kind of versed in this world, when I say box cutters, they're like, oh, no way. And it's like, I don't know, maybe we need to rethink that box cutter thing.
Well, we there's an opportunity for a lawyer joke in there, but we'll leave that aside. And especially as it relates to the difference between the United States and other countries. But so David, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I think there are some really good takeaways for people about developing a maker mindset, and also some specific aspects of working with people in maker spaces or broadly speaking, creative spaces. And honestly, I'll never think about making a sandwich in the same way after this conversation. So that's a good thing. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that one. For as long as I've known you, I don't think I don't know. It never stuck. But I think that's a really good way to break the ice with a group. Break the ice with people. So great.
So use it all you want.
All right. And as I mentioned, as they always say in YouTube land, we will include resources and other resources that David might provide that relate to our conversation. All right.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I don't mind, like if somebody wants to reach out for something I said or something like that, you can,
that's up to you. We'll open the floodgates. If you give contact, if you give contact information, I'm happy to provide that so that people can follow up. All right. Well, thanks again, David.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.